Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast, learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 38, and I'll be talking to Ashwyn Singh, an Indian comedian and musician. He's an immigrant that moved to Canada when he was 19. As someone that assimilated into a new culture, Ashwyn is constantly fascinated by things about culture that seem blatantly disingenuous to him. Yet people accept them at face value without question. He shows people the funny through the lens of his experiences and tries to get people to take themselves less seriously. Hello and welcome to Ashwyn. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I am curious to have this conversation with you, to delve into some of the areas that you have really taken on board in your life, from the comedy that you are expressing yourself in and the types of humor that are surrounded in that, which is very intriguing and also very interesting and actually really quite funny. So I've been enjoying that. And then the other aspect is the musical realm. Your flair for creativity and free flow of being in tune with whatever that look and feels like for you. You've been very candid with it, and you've been very, I want to say, explicit, because you do share a fair bit of that on social, through Clubhouse, through Instagram, and all these other social networks. How does that feel and fit for you coming out of, I want to say, possibly a traditional background? Because I also come from a traditional East Indian background too. So how does that fit for you?
It fits into my sense of rebellion.
Okay.
So I don't know how to be anyone that is not me. I just know when someone is trying to help me be me versus when they're trying to keep me from being me. And
Okay.
when I sense that they're trying to curb how I feel or force me into a certain way of thinking or a certain way of being, I feel the urge to break out of that. And a lot of it is reactionary, which is not a good thing. The action part of it is the self-expression.
Okay.
The action is I constantly think the more I share, the more I find who I'm supposed to be, how I'm supposed to be, the easier it becomes to live.
Right.
So I keep going down that route. There is a thing that people do that really rubs me the wrong way that I've recently noticed. And it's when they really want you to do something and they're afraid that you might say no, they try to frame their request in a way where it sounds less like a request and more like a demand.
Right.
So they won't say, I want you to do this. They'll say, you need to do this, right? You need to stay home. You need to not say things that make people feel awkward. You need to agree with this.
Right.
Right. And the truth is, I don't need to do anything.
Yes.
Right. If you're my friend, if you're a loved one, if you're anyone that I respect or just anyone that exists, I will like take what you want me to do and respectfully tell you whether or not I'm willing to do that thing. Right. But there I am under no obligation to do anything you ask, which means I don't need to do anything.
Yes.
Right. That's the explicit difference between when, I guess, I guess this qualifies as toxic masculinity when someone says, instead of saying I want to have sex with you, instead if they say you need to have sex with me, and then they go, what's the difference? And you go, just consent. Like
Right.
just the idea that I have free will and agency, that I'm able to exercise like some
Mm-hmm.
semblance of will over my own actions. Nothing major. Like
That's
we
it.
can
A minor
yeah,
thing.
we can ignore that because you're scared of being rejected. Of course, why not?
Right. Right.
uh,
Yeah. When did you see or feel that being more amplified? Was it or has it been really based around this whole COVID situation that we've been in for the last year or so?
mhm. So I would say there are three things that have really amplified this for me, and they've come at different points in my life. The first was growing up in a somewhat conservative culture, uh,
Yeah.
except not to the degree that collectivist cultures are conservative.
Right.
What will people say? How will they react?
Yeah.
Make sure your thoughts and actions are well considered.
Yes.
And I don't like any of those things.
Yes.
Second, when I immigrated,
Mhm.
because when cultures clash, people always assume that the geographical location that you are in will take precedence. That's not how that's supposed to work,
Right.
right? They always say, well, if you're blunt and we're polite, then you have to be polite. I have to
Right.
do no such thing.
That's right. That's right.
uh, and then the third was definitely is the pandemic, but it's the same problem that repeats itself. Is I think one piece of the pandemic puzzle that keeps getting lost is that you have to balance every extreme with a different extreme. In Let me explain that. So people think if I'm living in a house with two other people, right? And one of us is the most scared and wants to be the most conservative in their approach to the pandemic,
Mhm.
that the other two should lean towards that lowest common denominator and follow that approach,
Right.
right? Because it's about making everyone feel comfortable,
Right.
right? The problem is maybe my lowest common denominator is not fear of death due to the pandemic, it's fear of death from not wanting to live anymore,
Right.
right? The
Right.
risk of mental health and depression. And there is a difference between living and being alive.
Oh yeah.
And when you don't recognize that, you always risk feeling like you don't want to live anymore,
Yes.
right? So if your lowest common denominator is COVID and my lowest common denominator is the risk to my will to live, then I have to prioritize this and you have to prioritize that. But you
That's right.
will want to stay inside and I will want to leave and hug people,
Right.
right? But that doesn't mean I'm disrespecting your existence. It means that we are different people.
Yes.
And that piece of the puzzle got lost because I haven't heard that many people advocate for doing what is essential for you,
That's right.
right? Everybody says you decide what is essential for you, but then they also make you feel unpleasant or try when you tell them what is essential for you.
Absolutely.
So whenever I feel that little like curb your enthusiasm moment in
Mm.
society, that's when I like try to I don't want to run away from it. I want to go through it. So I'll try to respond as best I can with as much grace as I can muster, but I won't agree if I know I disagree.
Right. Right. Which highlights the rebellious streak, possibly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that's very interesting that you've been able to identify it like that. And I think that's a big challenge that a lot of people are actually going through. Like you said, whether they voice it or whether they recognize it, that's a whole different conversation. But there's many who have almost, I want to say, lost their own power, lost their even will of their own balance of life, for making decisions for themselves because the power has been exerted and given away to a certain degree very freely to, I want to say, those who are in control, our government, our society, our dominant systems, and all those pieces in between. It makes it to be a very difficult and controversial space to live in.
Yeah. And I will be the first to acknowledge and self-criticize. I have my own triggers.
Yeah.
For instance, I do leap to the conclusion sometimes that someone's trying to make me be not me more often than I should.
Mhm.
It's because of the way I grew up, and that one comes from more being an immigrant and walking into rooms, telling people things, and they just look at you like, "What did you just say?" Or "Why did you just say that?" Because I noticed.
Mhm.
And that's actually part of my journey as a comedian. Is I became a comedian when I realized that I had a flair for introducing awkwardness in conversation.
Right.
Because I would always walk into rooms and say things where people would look at me a little weird,
Mhm.
and as if to say, "Why did you just say that?"
Right.
And at first I used to resent that, but then I realized, wait, I can make people awkward whenever I want.
Yes.
That seems like a lot of power to give someone, especially if you don't like them,
Yes.
right? Why? Yeah, like I would never give someone that degree of control over my emotions to say, "I don't like you, yet every time you come into a room, I will go silent,"
Mm.
right?
Yes.
So then I started trying to say, okay, if I can introduce the tension, I can probably break it, right?
Right.
And to
Yes.
me, that's the entire purpose of comedy, is to, like, when you want to release the tension. Not always, because some conversations are important, and
That's
unpleasant because they're positive,
yeah.
right? But when you want to, and when something gets too heavy and you know the conversation won't be useful if you kept going that way, you break the tension and you
Right.
release, right? Uh, but that's where I started learning that. And there's a lot more to learn there. Like, that'll probably take me a lifetime, but that was the original motivation.
That's interesting. And that all came about when you became an immigrant, would you say?
Yeah, throughout my immigrant journey, like the first 4 or 5 years, maybe. When I first moved, I had no semblance of reason to even attempt to understand what was going on. I just knew people didn't like me, and I didn't know why.
Right.
Eventually, I grew out of it. There's a weird thing that happens with immigrants that I'm sure happens with other people and other experiences. It's just this is how it happened with me. Is
Mhm.
You lower your standards for friends and people in general,
Mm.
because there's a lot of people-shaped holes in your life where people used to be.
Yeah.
And it's actually nearly impossible to live without those people, right? Even if those people are now replaced by like shittier versions of those people.
Okay. Okay.
um, in the sense that you can't have a life without friends, at least not a good one,
Right.
right? In my view. And having some friends, even if their interests don't align with your interests, or if they don't have your best interests at heart, if you're alone and 19, it feels easier to have bad friends than to have no friends.
Right.
It's not true, but it feels easier,
Right.
right? And then those people will make you feel like you're not you, or you're not supposed to be, and then they'll make you feel unpleasant. And it's this constant erosion of what you think your personality is and what you
Mhm.
think your beliefs are,
Mhm.
until 3 years later you look in the mirror and you go, I'm a completely different person,
Mhm.
and I don't like this person at all.
Right. Yes.
um, and then you resent your so-called friends for making you into that person. And
Mm.
then you realize that you would rather be you and have them dislike you than be someone they like and not like yourself.
Right.
And then there's like a slow rebellious journey back to being who you thought you were, right? And I'm still in that curve.
Okay.
So that's why I'm quick to assume that someone is trying to curb my self-expression sometimes, because
Mm.
that's now become one of my triggers. Anytime someone looks at me unpleasantly, I think, are they trying to make me be something I'm not?
I
Right? I
see.
have to be very careful to balance that, to make sure, because sometimes they're just well-intentioned people that I made feel awkward by mistake, and I'm supposed to apologize.
Ah, that's interesting. I think kudos to you for catching that piece, being on that curveball to find yourself, because I think there are many people in this world, we allow other people's perspectives, judgments, and opinions to direct our life.
Yeah.
So we can get back onto that track of who am I? What do I look like? What do I feel like? What do I like? What do I don't like? And get into that space. It becomes more challenging because the ingrained pattern or behavior is so distilled to the core of our being that it's got to look like this particular model.
Mm-hmm.
And that often is a very challenging space to get out of. So kudos for you for getting into that space of looking outside of that and using an element to your advantage and to the ease of others, possibly the tool of comedy, which can cut tension, even if it's done in a very sophisticated way to get the point across, but not to be insulting in any form or fashion.
Yeah. That's why I enjoy it, because
Yes.
it's a magic trick.
Yes.
It's how do I sneak in the way I feel to you without ever making you feel like you need to feel bad about it. You don't need to feel bad about it. This is just how I
Right.
feel, and
Right.
I will use humor so that you can laugh at my circumstances and take yourself less seriously, because to whatever degree my circumstances are born out of your judgment,
Right.
right? You don't need to feel bad about that. I'm just trying to show you
Yes.
how that happened.
Right. But in the same token, it's still their opinion. We're not in control of how they feel. And I think, nor should we, I want to say as a collective, feel responsible for how they react. Yes, it's very kind and very generous of you to create a space for somebody to feel comfortable because you recognize that they're triggered by what you've said or how you walked into the room or what you're saying or what that conversation looks like. But in the same token, that's not your stuff. That's their stuff they got to deal with.
Unless they try to physically restrain me. I am not required to justify my actions.
Right?
It's a very strong way of saying that, but there's
Yes,
humor in that.
that's right. Very good.
Like, one of my favorite things that I wrote is people think cancel culture is new.
Mhm.
They think that's a new thing, and it's cancel culture has existed about as long as culture has existed.
Yes,
Because you remember when America said freedom of speech means you can say whatever you want. And then
right,
Galileo said, well, the Earth is not the center of the solar system. And then the Pope
right.
was like, oh, not anything. This hurts our feelings. The Catholic Church is a safe space. You can't come in here, make us feel uncomfortable with these opinions. Like, the Pope was the world's first snowflake. And Galileo was the first dude to get canceled. So these things are very old.
That's really an interesting point. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not a new space, 100%. Is this what really brought you into the space of comedy? Is to be able to express on a deeper level via the dialogue, the silent dialogue that's going on in your mind about what you want your life to look like, how you want to walk into a room and not manage that conversation, but contribute to a dialogue. Is that what it all is all about?
Sometimes I think the way I think is missing from things. I've said before that I have the privilege of being an outsider. I feel alone, but I get to sit on my perch and observe everybody else.
Yes.
And then I get to walk up to them and say, have you observed that this
Yes.
is something that's true about you? And usually they go, no, because to them it's ingrained in the way they've lived their life. So why would they notice it,
Absolutely.
right? Very little things like people use the word because as the entire explanation instead of a segue to their reason. You
Mm-hmm.
ask someone, why did you do this? They go, because. And you go, I think that's supposed to be like, now you explain why. As an immigrant, a lot of people will have this experience, at least I did, of you move somewhere and people say, Canada's a really nice place. People are so nice. And the first person you meet on the street that's a stranger looks at you and they say, how are you doing? And you feel like, oh my God, Canada is really nice. And then you turn around and they never stop walking.
Mm.
And you go, oh, Canada's not really nice. Canada's really polite,
Mm.
right? Because nice is when you want to know how I'm doing.
Right.
This is what culture has taught you is the appropriate thing to do,
Right.
right? It's not like the reason we don't do that maybe in New Delhi is because India has 1.4 billion people. If you pretended to care about everybody, you would be exhausted.
You wouldn't be going anywhere.
Yeah, we don't have that kind of time.
Right.
But at least in India, if somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, "How are you doing?" I know that they want to know,
Mm-hmm.
right? Somebody that works at a company and they say, if we have a 3-hour meeting on a Friday that ends at 5 p.m. and the presenter of the meeting at the end says, "Do you have any questions?" You don't.
Right.
I want to go home.
Yes.
Under no
Yes.
circumstances do you have questions. If you ask the question, I will come to your home and hurt you. Right? And
Yes.
and I thought that was funny, but then I also thought, wait, but if you don't want anybody to ask you any questions, under no circumstances are you to utter the words, "Does anybody have any questions?"
That's right.
Right? Because immigrants like me and people, anybody that didn't grow up exactly the way you grew up, right,
Yeah.
is is now getting tired of trying to understand your like subliminal clues
That's right.
and put in the effort to not ask you questions when you clearly stated, do you have questions?
Yes.
Right? This would be a
Yes.
lot easier for all of us if
Yes.
you just didn't ask questions you didn't want answered,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of
Absolutely.
expecting us to do the work so you can pretend that you're a nice person.
Yes. It's really true. And I don't know whether it's an immigrant thing or whether it's just a personality thing. I recognize there's a lot of people out there in the world who are really challenged to say what they mean.
Yeah, I think everybody is. I think some people find it maybe a little bit more important than other people.
Mhm.
And then I'm sure some people just don't realize that that's important. But
Yeah. Which takes us back to that piece of conversation you talked about as a 19-year-old, when you are looking to find yourself and there's a position of who am I? What am I? Am I important? But these people are validating me, so that's okay. But who am I? Do I matter? Does my opinion count? Where do I stand? What does all that look like? In reflection of all of that, and I'm sure everybody's had bouts of that from whether you were 19 or whether you were 6 or whether it was just last week in adult life, what are the attributes you feel you have honed from being in that space about yourself?
I think I wrote something a while back. This called, geez, the freedom in being disliked.
Okay.
And I think what I was trying to say is when people like you and you try to change yourself in a way that you think is appropriate for you, you still wonder if those people will like you after you change.
Right.
But if you acknowledge that nobody likes you, then in that bubble, you can find out exactly who you are, because at least much faster,
Mhm.
because you don't have to go, how will people feel? You just go, well, nobody likes me. I'll just figure it out, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually, like, everybody gets back to the battle of being liked and then figuring out how to be themselves in the middle of being liked. That's just human, right? Like, nobody is expected to go through life alone just so they can figure out self-expression. It's just, I had the unique privilege of going through that for maybe 2 or 3 years until
Mhm.
I started liking myself, and then I had friends again, and now I have to do it that way.
Right.
But but there's that freedom in saying, I, whether or not you like me, I will just acknowledge that you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then eventually, once I figure myself out at least a little, then we can have this conversation again. I think there are some things you have to accept are always going to be true about you, that were sort of put on you, but were not your intention. Like, I
Okay.
had to acknowledge that I will probably always be a person that is somewhat disillusioned with things.
Was that put on you?
Yes, because I never would have been that disillusioned or that questioning of society or social convention if people had not tried to convince me that I was disliked or that I wasn't accepted. Until I immigrated, I knew I was a little bit awkward,
Mhm.
but I never imagined that I was not accepted because I still had a family.
Right.
But when that family is about 14,000 kilometers away, it gets a lot easier to imagine that you don't have a family.
Right.
Then you get into the whole like questioning thing, what's true, what isn't. I'm free of literally everything I've ever known, but that also means I don't know how to move through the world.
Yes.
There's no sense of direction. And then once you figure that out, you go, oh, I'm remarkably disillusioned with the world. uh, and it's not because of what I did, it's because of what happened to me,
Okay. Yeah.
right? Once you accept something as part of you, then you can start to use it, you start to learn from it, right?
Right.
And it's a good thing when you show other people,
Right.
because then they get to question, and then
Right.
you can learn from them to be more trusting,
Right.
because that's the part that lacks for me.
Maybe even validation
Yeah.
and more acceptance to what is your vantage point and what is other people's perspective that you can, I want to say, manage a little bit better in a smaller setting,
Yeah.
and to give people that attention in that dialogue.
Yeah. And it kind of brings that back to just like comedy for me a little bit, is if I can figure out how to say something with skill, maybe I can make someone understand how I feel.
Mhm.
um, Everybody has things that they think people don't understand. Some people have more than others, but everybody has them,
Sure.
right? But
Yeah.
I think it does take a certain amount of, I don't think you understand how I feel, to get on stage and try to
Yes.
explain it,
Yes.
right? Because certainly if I already thought everybody understood me, I would never need to try.
Right. Which is a challenge in itself, I think. Perhaps there's dialogues and situations and types of conversations where there is no need for explanation
Hmm.
because you're already in that space of everybody understands me. This is it.
Yes, I feel that way after I make people laugh. um, who is it? I think it's Dave Chappelle.
Right.
He had a bar during his acceptance speech for the Mark Twain Prize. His mom used to say this. She said, sometimes you have to act like a lion so you can be the lamb you really are.
Right.
So he said, when I'm on stage, I will gab with the best of them. And I'm there
Right.
to show you how I feel in a way that'll make you laugh. Because certainly for me, the thing is like, when I make you laugh at something, you wouldn't have laughed at it if you already understood it,
Yeah.
right? So clearly you didn't understand it, but the fact that you're laughing means that you get it now. So
Yeah.
so I was able to take something that I wanted you to understand, and now you do understand it, right? So now I can relax
Yeah.
because you get it,
Yeah.
right? So if I'm in a room of friends, well, that's what that feels like, true friends.
Mm.
And if I'm in a room of, or if I'm in a room of 50 people that all just laughed at something I said, then I can sit quietly and not feel the need to explain.
Right. Isn't that magic?
Yeah, it lasts about 20 minutes. It's a terrible drug because it doesn't cost anything. In fact, it makes you money.
That's the magic, right?
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting why and how you are drawn to the realm of comedy, even to use that expression of word and laughter and humor to create spaces of silence, but also create thoughts, um, and almost plant seeds on a deeper level through the element of humor, which is really powerful. But I'm a believer that all the gifts and talents and tools that we use in our day-to-day life, or that we install or play with or navigate through, are presented to us for a particular reason.
Mm.
So it's not by accident that you've become a comedian rather than a graphic artist or a painter or whatever that may be, you know?
Yeah. I say I have enormous respect for painters, for artists. My brother is one of them. I have never been able to understand it.
Right?
Yeah, uh, it's the same when you talk to someone that you're thinking this person really doesn't get it, right? When their eyes glaze over,
Mm-hmm.
you're like, oh, that's how I feel when my brother tries to show me paintings. It's like, I can see that you are talented. I can see
Yes,
that there is skill in this, but I have
yes,
no emotional reaction
yes,
to
yeah,
anything you just did.
right. Yeah, that's all the more reason everything comes and shows us for a particular purpose.
Hmm.
Other than what you have shared, what do you feel your intention is with your comedy? Is it really to make people comfortable and to create space for their acceptance and your acceptance? Or is it truly something a little bit deeper for you?
I refuse to acknowledge that I will have any considerable impact on society. I think it's arrogant to think that. Uh, to like your impact, if you are one of 7.2 billion people in the world, should be somewhere around the realm of 1 over 7.2 billion. Very small. Um, and I acknowledge that as a human being, if that is my limitation, I am fine with it, right?
Okay.
Um, but the selfish part of comedy for me is I want to be understood. Once you get it, it's helpful for you. But for me, it's also, no, I want you to get it because I don't feel understood. I don't feel comfortable in this room right
Mm-hmm.
now. So that there's that selfish element of it. Outside of that, I think I've always been a creative, and that life appeals to me. The
Right.
Think about why I came to Vancouver. It's just this is too much order for me. It
Right.
feels too much like prison. So I
Right.
just upped and left, right? And I'm
Yeah.
not one to try to run away from anything.
Hmm.
Uh, but this is something where I'm like, uh, this exists everywhere I go. So it's not like I'm running away from it. I'm going to the place where I will be able to be the most free.
Yeah.
And so that life of I'll go where I want to go, I'll talk to people I've never met, I'll enjoy my life, and I will find love in strange places, in chaos, and I will attempt to reach out into chaos and turn it into order through
Hmm.
art
Hmm.
by attempting to take something people don't understand and turn it into something people do understand.
Right.
And that life appeals to me. And I never understood how people can be friends with the people they work.
Do you feel that comedy is your calling?
I think so. Yeah. I don't know where it'll go, what I'll end up doing. Maybe my definition of what comedy is will change.
Mhm.
Maybe I'll become a politician that's funny. Yet. Not true. Like, I don't know where I'm trying to say I don't know where life will take me.
I
But
get that.
today, right now, I think I'm supposed to be a comedian.
Yeah. And do you envision it to be a different stance, a different space, a different version of what's been put out there in the ethers or what's been set precedent?
I think the one greatest thing about comedy is nobody can be a better comedian than you are if you are talking about who you are.
Mm.
So you use everything you know and everything you are, and then anybody that tries to plagiarize you is only ever going to be so-so,
Hmm.
because they couldn't possibly understand,
That's right.
right? Right now, I am maybe 4 years into this art and falling in love with it.
Right.
So once I'm 10, 15 years into the art and I have some understanding of what the art is supposed to look like,
Mm.
then maybe I'll be able to express all of who I am with it,
Right.
and we'll see where that takes me. That right now I'm just learning how to say things funny
Right.
and what people think is funny and what funny is, right?
Hmm.
Once I learn those two things slightly separately, like who I am and what funny is, then maybe I'll be able to combine them and everybody will be like, this is new. We've not seen this before. I think I've done maybe one thing that people think they have not seen before. Like I had no idea that I was saying something. like like anything that I have made to date that people thought was very me was probably completely by accident. I was trying, but I didn't know that I had succeeded.
Right.
Maybe one day I'll know exactly what I'm doing. Right
Yeah.
now I'm happy to just come across greatness by accident every once in a while.
But that's a journey in itself, though, right?
Yeah, very much so.
More about how much you know about yourself, which is forever evolving. You get to unravel and delve into zones and areas that you didn't even know were there. And then you turn around 6 months later and you're down another rabbit hole, and then another rabbit hole. And then it just continues. And before you know it, 15 years later, I'm asking you the same question and you're giving me the same response.
If that happens 15 years from today, I will be very glad for this conversation. Let me tell you.
So it's continuing that investigation, continuing that exploration of self and others in all environments.
And
So what's next? What's next for you?
everything's up in the air right now because Ontario is still in lockdown
Mm.
and Canada is still very much in the throes of illness.
Right.
Once things calm down just a little and I feel free to do more than just be by myself, I would like to get back to doing comedy live,
Right.
and then I would like to go on tour someday.
Nice.
I would like to go to the US, and I get the sense that Austin might be the place for me, my base of operations forever place. I don't know why I feel that way.
Mm.
I think I'll always want to travel and go to somewhere that's not my home,
Right.
but I think for a place to live out of, uh, that might probably be it.
Mm.
But yeah, over the next year, I hope to get back to live stages, and I hope to find friends to go on tour with, and then go on tour.
Beautiful.
And I hope people follow along on Instagram.
I'm sure they will, not only on Instagram, but I'm sure they'll be following you live from stage to stage. Keep people laughing and keep discovering yourself and holding that vulnerable place for people to look at themselves in a humorous way.
Thank you for all of your questions. This was a meditation.
Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your insights and shares. Thank you for being vulnerable with me and sharing.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Naranjan.
You're welcome. I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.